So after roughly 6 years of development and 3 years of early access, the much anticipated fantasy RPG Baldur's Gate 3 is soon releasing on PC and not long after that on PS5 as well. And so in preparation for the launch of this massive game, I'll be breaking down basically everything that you actually need to know before heading into Baldur's Gate. Now you may have noticed that this video isn't very long, and this is simply because I don't want to waterboard you guys with unessential details. But if you do think I've missed out on something, then remember to comment below, as I'm sure other viewers would appreciate any such information themselves. That said, let's get right into it, shall we? First things first, Baldur's Gate 3 is not really a direct sequel to BioWare's old classics, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, but more of a spiritual successor set in the same universe, that universe being that of Dungeons and Dragons. Speaking of which, the game gets its namesake from the city of Baldur's Gate, a gigantic city of huge importance in the world of Dungeons and Dragons, and it's within and surrounding the city that most of BG3 will be set. If you want to read up more on Baldur's Gate as a setting, I can highly recommend checking out the Forgotten Realms wiki, where you can read through basically all of its history. In any case, you will begin your journey to Baldur's Gate by first creating your character, which is an entire journey of its own because of just how complex BG3's character creation system is and will be. If you've played the early access version, you'll know that there are currently 9 races to choose from, these being humans, elves, half-elves, drow, dwarves, githyanki, gnomes, halflings, and tieflings, with the half-orcs and dragonborn races being introduced at launch. Most of these races also have something called sub-races, where you can select between different types of peoples that hail from different parts of the world. Aside from this, you can select between a wide variety of facial options, skin colors, hairstyles, hair colors, eyes, and much more to personalize your character. Looks aren't everything though, and the cool thing about the character creation is that each race have some pretty varied racial strengths. Examples here are the elves that gets a bonus toward dexterity, making them really suitable for archer and thief builds. There are a lot of variations here to choose from, and aside from the varied stats between races, you also get to choose a background for your character that boosts some of your skills as well. Finally, you choose your class, and here we have yet another wide range of options. You've got the Barbarian, Bard, Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Ranger, Rogue, Paladin, Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard, with the Monk class expected to be playable on release. And after reaching level 3, you will get the option to pick a subclass, like for the Rogue for example, you'll get the option to choose between Thief or Arcane Trickster, either of these subclasses providing you with different skills and abilities. All of these different classes and subclasses will create an incredible amount of variety, and while I personally haven't played through the early access with every class, it's always fun to learn new ones. Now, when BG3 launches, you won't necessarily have to create your own character, but you'll be able to choose between some pre-made ones, like the official companion characters, Shadowheart, Astarion, Gale, Will, and Lizelle. And at launch you will also have access to Karlach, a barbarian tiefling with a pretty heavy backstory. Next to her, you also have a number of potential companions that you'll meet throughout the game, but I won't spoil who these are. And yes, before anyone asks, you can supposedly romance each and every one of them.
We're bang, okay?
Now when it comes to actual gameplay, BG3's combat is almost entirely turn-based. Why I say almost is because you can do things like sneak up on enemies and kill them, or push NPCs off of cliffs before they have the chance to react, but most combat encounters will play out in turns. Now, while this may sound boring to some people, BG3's combat is anything but boring, partly because most of your abilities and attacks feel satisfying and powerful to use. I'll be honest here, I never was a huge fan of turn-based games before Baldur's Gate 3, so it's quite the accolade for this game to have won me over on the gameplay department. And a huge tip for anyone who's unsure about the gameplay, just be patient and read the tooltips. Let the game play out and you'll learn soon enough, as learning to master BG3 is half the fun. Oh, and remember to rest at your camp a lot. I mentioned in my early access review earlier this year that the game has a tendency to make you think that your character is living on borrowed time. Well, you don't, so rest up as much as you can between each difficult fight, provided you have the supplies for it, which you can find all around the game world. Speaking of daunting gameplay elements, you will also be rolling dice for a huge chunk of the game. No matter if you're lockpicking a chest or trying to persuade someone, you will be rolling on whether you succeed in your endeavor or not. This is a huge part of what makes BG3 so fun, because it's generally very unpredictable and no playthrough is ever really the same. Or well, you could always just save spam before some of the bigger moments and reload the game if you fail a check, but to be perfectly honest, that's kinda cheesing it a little bit too much. But hey, you do you. Speaking of which, if you want to increase your chances of winning dice rolls, remember to pick dialogue-centric attributes for your character at the start, like a background that increases persuasion. Besides, some of your characters and certain items will provide you with dialogue bonuses to increase your chances. Now, I'm gonna go on a wild guess here and assume that a lot of Diablo players will be picking this game up. And so naturally you might be asking, what about gear and shiny loot? Well, there is a lot of that even in the early access version, but I wouldn't imagine Larian putting in a bunch of legendaries a la Diablo 4, especially since BG3 isn't an action RPG. Oh, and a pro tip here, if you decide to play as a barbarian or warrior type class, make sure to kill the demonic boss in the intro because you'll get something really cool. Thank me later. Now, besides all of the early access stuff that you can try out for yourself right now, Larian has confirmed several things that we can expect when the game releases. First, among the 12 classes and 46 subclasses, there will be over 600 spells available to use and 308 passive abilities in the full version of the game. And to get access to these spells and abilities, you will need to level up accordingly, and so the level cap will be set to 12 in the final version. Now, one huge talking point has been about the amount of cinematics there will be in the full game, and according to Larian themselves, there will be at least 174 hours of just cinematics alone. Now, of course, this is absolutely huge, but to give some clarification, this is including various dialogue scenes together with actual pre-rendered cutscenes. And so most players will actually only get to see around 30 to 40 hours of cinematic stuff, which again will mostly be dialogue scenes. In rough comparison though, the Mass Effect trilogy had roughly 1,180,000 words spread throughout all three games, and Baldur's Gate 3 supposedly has over 2 million words of dialogue in total, meaning that yes, comparatively, BG3 seems to be almost twice as big in terms of dialogue in comparison to the entire Mass Effect trilogy. So yeah, 174 hours of dialogue in total sorta makes sense. Now, Larian also announced that BG3 will be fully subtitled in 13 different languages, that being English, French, German, Polish, Russian, Simplified Chinese, Traditional Chinese, Spanish, Spanish Latin America, Turkish, Portuguese, Italian, and Ukrainian. On whether the 2 million word count includes the different languages or not, I'm not entirely sure, but no matter what, make sure to set aside a lot of time for Baldur's Gate 3, because this game is set to be absolutely massive with possibly the greatest amount of intricate handmade content in gaming in years. Another thing that has been announced by Larian is that BG3 will be getting different difficulty levels to choose from at launch. On their official community update, they state, "In story mode, combat has been made more forgiving so players can fully immerse themselves in the narrative layer of this adventure. In this mode, friendly NPCs are harder to kill, trader prices are at 20% discount, and you'll begin the game with a +2 starting proficiency bonus. Hardcore mode, then, is where to test your mettle. In this mode, enemy lethality is cranked up to brutal, ensuring that enemy AI are stronger, will prioritize squishier targets with low AC, and will seize opportunities to go in for the kill. Additionally, many adjustments have been made to the fights themselves, specifically for hardcore mode, with certain enemies receiving additional support through reinforcements, spells, or consumable items. Aside from these 2 new difficulty levels for both beginners and hardcore players, you will still be able to play on normal, which is the early access version available right now. Of course, it has to be mentioned that despite me not being a proponent of pre-ordering games, pre-ordering the Digital Deluxe Edition or the Collector's Edition, or simply already owning the early access version of Baldur's Gate 3 will allow you to play the full version of the game 72 hours before the official release date, which is the 3rd of August on PC and 6th of September on PS5. And that's it. This is basically everything you actually need to know before heading into Baldur's Gate 3. As always, thank you to all my wonderful Lensven squad members for supporting the channel, and if you do want to support me in my content creation endeavor, then be sure to join up by using the link in the description. But until next time, MrHulthen signing out.